I joined at HMAS Lewin in '67. I completed 36 years. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Keith Bailey loved his time in the Navy, a career which saw him rise to the rank of commander and even meet a monarch. But it was his time in the lower ranks which would leave a lasting legacy.
When I joined the Navy in '67, I didn't have Parkinson's. And when I left in 2003, I did have Parkinson's. So whatever it was that caused Parkinson's happened on their watch.
These days, Keith Bailey does metalwork as a hobby. But back when he was a sailor, cleaning motor parts was part of his job. He used Turcosolve, a metal cleaner which contained the chemical trichloroethylene, also known as TCE. At the time, it was not considered dangerous.
When you finish your day, you'd end up with the grease all over you. You'd wash yourself down with Turcosolve.
That pervasive use would come back to haunt Keith Bailey almost 4 decades later and force him out of the Navy.
I couldn't write, couldn't use a mouse. I went to see the doc and he put me through all the tests, sent me to a neuro and he said, "You got Parkinson's."
In 2016, the Department of Veterans Affairs formally recognised exposure to trichloroethylene as a cause of Parkinson's. Keith Bailey believes he's the first Australian veteran to have such a claim approved.
If you had 2,000 hours of exposure to trichloroethylene, there was a reasonable hypothesis that your Parkinson's was caused by the trichloroethylene.
It's been linked to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, kidney and liver cancer in particular. So there are things where your risk increases of those diseases, not that you'll necessarily get them.
TCE wasn't just used in the Navy. Decades ago, its use was widespread in car making and metalworking across Australia.
We think hundreds to possibly several thousand sites use the material. The most common thing we've found is people disposed of used TCE by pouring onto the ground. So we would expect many thousands of litres were disposed of this way.
3 months ago, Deanne Backshaw and some of her neighbours were told they had high levels of TCE vapours coming up through their floors. She has lived in the Adelaide suburb of Theberton for 13 years and is worried.
Well, mine were in the 30s. I think that's 30 parts per million, which doesn't actually sound that much, but apparently it is a level that's injurious to your health.
When TCE seeps into the soil, it can travel kilometres through the groundwater. During the 1970s in the United States, a town's water supply was contaminated and children became sick. The scandal and subsequent lawsuit was turned into a Hollywood movie.
The water from 2 city wells is contaminated, or was before they shut them down, with something called, I can't pronounce this, trichloroethylene.
In Adelaide, TCE is also moving through the groundwater, but it's coming up through the soil and into homes as a toxic vapour.
It's a very challenging thing for people. We're knocking on their door and saying we found a chemical, we think there might be a chemical near or in your house. It's a chemical you don't want there, and we're trying to do something about that. And as you'd appreciate, that's a very challenging conversation to have.
Let's hope that they're right, that we are good and everything is okay.
The SA Environment Protection Authority had its first difficult conversation in 2014, when TCE contamination forced the relocation of 30 public housing tenants from Clovelly Park, south of Adelaide.
It's okay for them, they don't live here. They don't breathe it in, they don't eat, sleep, drink it, We do.
The homes were near a car parts factory and a former Mitsubishi plant.
Besides, they're contaminated.
Residents were furious because the government kept the contamination quiet for weeks.
We've had nothing Are they going to test our soil as well?
I've had something seriously wrong with me. I don't know whether this could be the cause of it.
Clearly the process we have now hasn't worked for you, and I'm sorry about that.
While authorities in the United States have proposed a ban on TCE, there are no plans to outlaw its use in Australia.
Industry has changed. The amount of TCE being used is, I believe, substantially reduced, and so the risks are changing too. What we're dealing with is a legacy of past use.
In response to 730's inquiries, the New South Wales EPA revealed it's monitoring 18 industrial sites with varying levels of TCE. Victoria has 10 sites under observation. In Adelaide, a new method is being used to try to rid homes of contamination. Kate, this is your son's room. How concerned were you that TCE was coming up through the floor?
Oh, we were very concerned, definitely, because at the time our son was still quite a young baby.
A fan has been installed in Kate Moore's house to remove the TCE vapours.
So we used a series of pipes underneath the floor, which is common practice in the US, which is connected to a fan, which is in the roof in this house, and then that vents to atmosphere and that removes the TCE from underneath the floor.
Another 6 homes are due to have the fan system installed, but it's not cheap. South Australian taxpayers are footing the bill because many of the polluters are no longer in business.
There's a rough guide, it's about $20,000 to $30,000 to mitigate one house.
We've been here back in the house for 12 months, and the EPA has done about 5 different tests to check the levels of TCE in the house, and we feel absolutely safe.
The Adelaide homes found contaminated in 2014 have been demolished. Peter Dolan says much more work is needed to understand the full effects of TCE across Australia.
It's a long-term chemical hazard, so it's a chemical where you don't want to be exposed to this for decades. We've learnt a lot, and I think we're better at it than we used to be. But no, there's a large task still ahead.